If you're worried that this painting looks difficult, remember that's only because you're looking at a finished piece. And you know that taking it step by step is going to make the fear go away. Plus, my technique spotlight will help you up your game. So pick up your supplies and let's do this. In the description of this video, you can download this photo of what I'm using with a detailed list with all references and also links to everything that you can see here. For colors, I've made it very simple. I'm going to be using only two. Ultramarine blue, and that's a very common watercolor, and I'm also going to be using Payne's Gray. And if you don't have Payne's Gray, you can substitute that with any black or brown. And the same for ultramarine, you can use any blue that you have. A personal preference here that I think is worth mentioning is when you don't like a color, like I don't like ultramarine blue as it is, I find it's too flashy for my style. Well, then you can mix another color into it, like I'm doing here with Payne's Gray, to get myself a whole new shade of blue. And that's really something you can do with any color. Something I think is going to be very helpful to get started with this tutorial is to know that I'm going to tell you what I'm doing when I approach that kind of a painting like this with a mass of something like these mountains or a forest with or without a bit of sky. I treat the painting as a whole by painting a base layer on the whole sheet, and that's why I'm wetting the whole thing. I always use 100% cotton paper cold pressed, and I think it's best to get smooth washes of paint. It also dries much slower, and that really helps to have more time in painting a base layer. So just be aware of that in case you see your paper dries much faster than mine, or if your paint doesn't look as smooth. That could be the reason why. Even with that type of good paper, I wet the sheet for a long time, maybe a minute here, just so the water sinks inside the fibers, and that will give me more time to apply paint before the paper starts drying. You really want to keep that in mind. Paper quantity, and then wetting the sheet for long enough, especially if your paper tends to dry fast, that's very important. The sky is really light on the reference, so I'm going to add a little bit of water to my paint. When the sheet is wet, the goal is to block in colors, and I'll use Payne's Gray for texture and shadows. That's usually done later in a painting. So right now it's just going to be one color, ultramarine blue, with a little bit of Payne's Gray because that's what I did. I mixed both of them. And to leverage our sheet being wet, we're going to start building up the contrast with that one color. To do this, you're going to need to adjust the amount of water to your paint. So the easiest way is to start from a creamy mix of paint like milk. To get it, you just dip your paintbrush in water, then in the paint, in water again, in the paint again, etc. until you get a big enough puddle of the color that you want. There is neither too much water nor too much paint in that mix. It's a good balance. So you should get something vibrant but still transparent enough for watercolors. To build contrast with just that color, we're going to need a lighter tone and a darker tone. So for the lighter tone, you're just going to add water. Your color should look lighter, less vibrant, and even more transparent. For the darker tone, just add more paint from your pan or your tube. You should get even more of a vibrant color and more opacity because there's going to be just a little water left. So the watercolors is looking more like gouache, for instance. So in our painting, because it's almost a monochrome painting, that's exactly what I'm doing. I added water to my mix for the sky to look lighter. And now I'm using the mix as I prepared it, creamy, for the rest of the painting. And notice I'm leveraging the white of the paper for even better contrast. And that's important in a snow painting. You don't always have to have the white of the paper, but if you can, work on wet paper like we're doing now and leave paper white areas in there. It's really important to mimic those bright snow areas we get to see in real life. You can see I'm using a large paintbrush because this step is not precise and it also helps me to paint faster. We'll be using small paintbrushes later as we get deeper into the painting. We did the most important step of getting started here, and if your paper is already drying, you can dry it completely and re-wet everything and pick up where you left off. It's absolutely okay to do it that way. Mine is still wet, not as much as it was before, but I think it's perfect this way because the paint is going to spread less and I can start refining the contrast. And to do that, since I already have light paper white areas and a mid-tone with the blue mix that I made in the beginning, I'm going to be able to start placing darker tones, and I'm going to do that by adding a tad of Payne's Gray to my mix. And you can see I really take it step by step from light to dark, no rush. Remember, the goal is that by the end of the space layer, we have the broad visuals of what this landscape would look like without all the details, and we can still layer again if we're not happy with the outcome. Up there are dark mountains, so I start blocking them in with a small paintbrush for more precision. Don't worry that the paint is spreading out a bit at this point, it's normal. And a trick to refine this, so we can keep it under control, is to clean up that paint that spreads out too much with a clean and damp paintbrush. And if that paintbrush is almost dry, it will easily soak up the extra paint, so make sure it is, and you can use a paper towel to remove that excess water from it. I find it easier to work from top to bottom. That's usually what most people will do. You can start creating shapes on the snow like here. I'm making straight strokes to do that, and the good thing about it is that it gives direction to the shadows and the landscape in general. If you're wondering how I know to make those shapes, I'm just copying what I see on the reference. I make sure that the bottom of the snow is dark enough so I have that depth in the painting built up. That's because what's farther away from the horizon and closer to us should normally appear to be a little darker, more detailed. That's a general rule that I apply to my watercolors and that you'll see a lot of artists apply to. The base layer is finished, and I'm glad because you can really see how we have the main shapes here. So now it's really going to be easier to refine this. We have a base to work from. Make sure this is completely dry before you move on and onto the second layer. In my painting style, I like things to look realistic. I don't really like loose styles, and I enjoy taking the time to paint, so I almost always go for a second layer to intensify the colors and contrast in my painting. That's not a must. You can leave that first layer as such and just move on to the next step if you like. In real time, just so you know, this painting took me about 1.5 hours, and I took my time enjoying the process, so you see it doesn't take forever to paint realistically. You can mix more paint when you run out. It's a good time to do it. You can add more pigment than water compared to what you did before. The mix should be a little thicker at this point. And remember, we always want to go darker and darker, and that's why we do this. I'm wetting the sheet again, and it's faster this time because we already have paint on there. So we're basically doing exactly the same thing as in the base layer, except this time we're not touching the very light parts much. This is mostly about increasing shadows here. For example, I find the sky is too white, so I'm going to add to it a little bit. You can see here the advantage of covering the whole sheet in paint because we get to see each part next to each other and we get to adjust the intensity of each one more easily, so the final result looks cohesive. Imagine if we painted each part separately, it would be a lot harder. Even in that second layer, don't be afraid to play with water for lighter areas like the mountains at the back, for instance. And we can play with adding more gray in our mix for those darker ones. Now I'm getting into a bit more detail, and that translates into the strokes that I'm making. To do this well on any other painting you want to tackle, it's a matter of observing your reference photo. Okay, so right now I can feel that my paper is drying quicker because I applied a superficial coat of water this time around. And in a way that's great because my shadows will show better, the paints will also spread less, so that means the shapes stay more accurate. At the bottom here, it's really drying. I'm going to take advantage, I have a few minutes left I think before it dries too much, to go heavier on shadows in some places. Again, I'm going to add more Payne's Gray, and notice that my mix is getting thicker, and it's exactly what you want when your paper is drying. Because if you were to add a watery mix of paint to drying paper, that extra water from your brush would disturb the drying paint on paper and you would get some blooms. Notice that we're getting better here. The landscape is more accurate. So now we're going to dry this completely and we're going to move on. We have an awesome base for our landscape, but now it's time to refine contrast a little bit more. And this time, we're not going to wet the whole thing. We're going to work section after section. And we're going to use my favorite technique for this. Apply paint on dry paper. If you leave it like this, you will get harsh lines all around. So what you do is grab another paintbrush before this dries. You have to do that quickly. You wet the paintbrush, you dab it on a paper towel so it's just damp. And then you can come and soften the hard edge and you've got yourself a soft edge now. We'll be working with our smaller paintbrushes once more and playing with adding more water or more pigment to our color mix here too. The top mountains still are too light, so I'm going to add dark thick paint. And I'm using the technique that I just showed you to avoid harsh lines here, only where I don't want them. At the bottom, for instance, I'm glad to have those harsh lines because as you can clearly see, I'm able to shape the mountain below this one as I please, and that's pretty cool. I noticed that the top of the main mountain is lighter than the ones we just enhanced, so naturally that means less gray in that paint and more water. Here's another technique you can use. When you wet a section you're working on to get rid of harsh lines, take advantage that part is wet now to add subtle texture in there, like lines or dots, whatever you think you need. It works well in a mountain painting or just a snowy landscape painting, and it's what I'm doing here. For the very light mountains at the very back, I like a blurry effect, so I'm going to be using that technique again. It's very handy, as you can see. I'm going to fade a harsh line with a clean and damp paintbrush. But here I'm just going to do it slightly so we still get to see the shape well. Let's keep going section after section. We have time, there's no rush. I'll speed this part up so you can see it come to life, but you can slow it down in the settings of the video if you want to have a closer look. And look up here how we can start shaping our rocks with dark strokes. Just a few strokes and everything changes, it's just magical. This was the longest part in the whole painting, but it's super satisfying to me. If you're enjoying this so far too, I'd love to know from the comments because it helps me learn what kind of videos you want to see, how I can better help you. So let me know. I wanted to make the bottom darker here, but I added too much paint. And in this case, there's something that we can do to fix it. We can use the lifting technique. So the lifting technique is good when you want to get the whites of the paper back when your paint is still wet. Otherwise, it's going to be much harder to do. So grab a clean paintbrush, you wet it, dab it on a paper towel, but insist so it becomes almost dry. You really should see the bristles separating a bit. Then you can press hard on the wet paint and you'll see part of it come off. And I'm doing this right now on the bottom part because I made it too dark and it's getting better now. We're gonna dry this and move on. This is gonna be the easy and fast part of the painting. For this step, we're adding the darkest rocks, the ones not covered in snow, and for a little wow effect, you want them to pop. So what we're doing is adding very dark and thick paint. A lot of Payne's gray mixed to a little bit of ultramarine blue, just to keep the color harmony in our painting, and very little water. The technique we'll use is called the dry brush technique, very useful for rocks and many other things. You don't necessarily need thick and dark paint for this. All you really need is to pick up whatever paint you have, then you dab this paintbrush with all the paint on it on a paper towel, and if the stroke on paper looks normal, it means you didn't remove enough water from the paintbrush, so you do it again. And when you see the tooth of the paper showing through, that's exactly what you want. Notice that I'm holding the paintbrush horizontally because it's way easier to create texture that way. Something extra that I do when I see that the texture ends a little bit too abruptly on the smooth part is I soften one side of it with a clean and damp paintbrush technique I showed you earlier. Let's see how this looks like. Remember, you can slow down the video anytime. For added texture, a cool thing to do is to add splatters, and that works well with snow as long as you don't go overboard with it. You just want to add a little something, that's it. And you see I really don't add a lot of them, just a touch. And on to highlights. They're actually still important even though we have paper white areas showing. You don't always need them in a snow painting. But you'll see it can improve it a lot more, and that's again because the contrast is better with strong highlights. I'll use my watercolor stick for this, and if you're wondering what this is, don't worry, I'll just link a video to it later. So you can use white gouache or white gel pen instead, you don't have to have this. In those tiny areas that we could not preserve, you might need to see, you need some highlights that it will look better with a little bit of highlight. So in this case, try and work with concentrated paints, whether it's gouache or watercolor, very little water added, it will show better. And look at how much better this looks. And I didn't add that much really. So remember the white stick? Watch this video next to find out how to improve all your watercolors with it. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll see you next time for a new video.